Hit subscribe, leave your thoughts below, and stay with me, because this story doesn't just haunt Florida. It lingers. The rain was still falling when deputies found the car. It sat crooked on the shoulder of a rural highway in Jackson County, Florida, hazard lights blinking weakly against the storm. The driver's door was open. The engine was still warm. And inside, slumped against the steering wheel, was 41-year-old Officer Michael Jenkins. Blood streaked across the dashboard. His service weapon was gone. The first deputy on scene would later say the silence was what disturbed him most. No screeching tires. No shattered glass. Just the slow drip of rainwater mixing with something darker as it pooled beneath the vehicle. Officer Jenkins had responded to a late-night disturbance call at a small mobile home park just outside Marianna. A domestic dispute, dispatch said. Possible weapons involved. Routine, but tense. He radioed in at 10:42 p.m. At 10:47, there was a burst of static, then nothing. Backup arrived 12 minutes later. By midnight, the highway was flooded with blue lights. Crime scene tape snapped violently in the wind. Detectives crouched under umbrellas, photographing shell casings glinting against wet asphalt. The medical examiner confirmed what everyone already knew. Execution style. One shot to the head at close range. The manhunt began before sunrise. Names floated through the darkness like ghosts. Witnesses at the trailer park described shouting, then a tall man storming out just before Officer Jenkins arrived. Some said he was agitated. Others said he looked calm, too calm. He had a sharp jawline, restless eyes, and a reputation that made people lower their voices when they spoke his name. Victor Tony Jones. 38 years old. Local drifter. Occasional construction worker. Known for bar fights and a short fuse. Arrested twice for assault. Recently paroled after serving time for armed robbery. And now, the last person seen near a murdered police officer. By dawn, his face was on every local station. Sheriff Daniel Harrow stood before cameras, jaw tight. We consider Victor Tony Jones armed and extremely dangerous. If you see him, do not approach. The problem was, Victor had vanished. His trailer was empty. Clothes missing. No vehicle in sight. His cell phone left behind, battery ripped out. The only thing investigators found inside was a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey and a handwritten note crumpled in the trash. 3 words. They made me. Detective Laura McKenna studied the note under fluorescent lights at the station. She'd seen desperation before. Panic. Rage. But this was different. The handwriting wasn't rushed. It was deliberate. They made me. Who was they? As forensic teams processed the scene, another detail surfaced. Officer Jenkins' body camera was missing. Not damaged. Not discarded nearby. Gone. Someone had taken it. The implications were immediate. If Victor shot Jenkins in self-defense, the footage would show it. If it was murder, it would show that, too. Removing the camera wasn't panic. It was strategy. The search widened beyond county lines. Highway patrol units scanned gas stations and rest stops. Helicopters traced the tree line bordering the highway. K-9 teams picked up a scent leading into dense woods, but it vanished near a dirt road. Then came the break. At 3:17 p.m., a clerk at a pawn shop 40 miles west reported a man matching Victor's description trying to sell a police-issued handgun. The serial number matched Jenkins' weapon. Security footage showed Victor clearly. Damp clothes. Mudstreak boots. Eyes scanning the room like prey tracking predators. He didn't look hysterical. He looked calculating. But before deputies could respond, he was gone again. The footage spread fast. National headlines now reading, "Fugitive suspect in officer killing on the run." Public sympathy for Jenkins surged. A father of 2. 12 years on the force. Known for coaching youth baseball. His widow, Emily, appeared briefly outside their home, flanked by family. She said nothing. Her red eyes said enough. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. The governor demanded updates. Federal agents offered assistance. Killing a law enforcement officer changes everything. The charge wasn't just murder, it was capital murder. Death penalty territory. Meanwhile, Detective McKenna kept circling back to the note. They made me. Victor had no known accomplices in the trailer park. No gang affiliations. No active warrants beyond minor violations. If someone made him do it, who? She requested financial records. 2 days before the shooting, Victor withdrew $4,000 in cash, nearly everything in his account. Odd for a man who barely kept steady work. Stranger still, a deposit of $5,500 had hit his account the week before from an unfamiliar LLC based in Tallahassee. Shell company. No website. No public presence. Why would someone pay Victor Tony Jones over $5,000 days before a police officer was killed? The woods search intensified. On the third night, a hunter checking his trail cameras spotted something unusual, an abandoned pickup truck partially concealed under brush. The plates were stolen. Inside, fast food wrappers, a map marked with backroads, and a backpack. Inside the backpack was Officer Jenkins' body camera. The battery was dead. The casing scratched but intact. When technicians finally powered it up, the room fell silent. The footage began shaky, Jenkins stepping out of his cruiser, rain streaking across the lens. He approached the trailer cautiously, hand near his holster. A man stood in the doorway. Victor. Their voices were clear. Evening, Victor. We got a call about shouting. I didn't call you. I know. Just here to make sure everyone's safe. There was tension, but no immediate threat. Then Victor said something that froze the room. You shouldn't be here tonight. Why is that? Because they're watching. Static crackled briefly. Jenkins shifted his stance. Who's watching, Victor? Victor's eyes flicked past the camera, toward the tree line. That's when the first shot rang out. But it didn't come from Victor. The footage jerked violently as Jenkins staggered. A muzzle flash illuminated the darkness, from somewhere beyond the porch. Victor dropped to the ground, shouting, I told you! The video cut to black as the camera hit pavement. The room inside the sheriff's office felt smaller. If that footage was real and unedited, Victor hadn't fired the first shot. Which meant the execution-style bullet to Jenkins' head happened after the initial chaos. Someone else had been there. Someone unseen. And now, the narrative shifted from lone fugitive to something far more dangerous. The question wasn't just where Victor was. It was who was hunting him. By sunrise, the manhunt doubled in urgency, not just to capture a cop killer, but to uncover whoever pulled that first trigger from the shadows. Because if Victor Tony Jones wasn't acting alone, then a second gunman was still out there. And they had already proven they could disappear into the Florida woods without a trace. But the real shock hadn't surfaced yet. Because when detectives enhanced the final seconds of that body cam footage, just before it cut out, they noticed something in the reflection of the trailer window. A silhouette, standing behind Victor, holding something metallic, and smiling. But when they went back to the trailer park to question residents again, one trailer was suddenly empty. And scrubbed clean. Whatever had started as a domestic disturbance was now spiraling into something organized, deliberate, and deadly. And Victor Tony Jones, the man the entire state believed was a cop killer, might have been running from something far worse than prison. The next discovery would change the case forever. The trailer was too clean. Detective Laura McKenna stood in the narrow doorway, the Florida heat pressing against her back, and felt it immediately. Not the usual clutter of a rushed departure. Not the smell of panic. This place had been wiped down with intention. The name on the lease was Raymond Pike. 46. Long-haul truck driver. No criminal record. Quiet. Paid rent in cash. Neighbors described him as forgettable. Kept to himself. Always polite. The kind of man who could live 10 feet away from you for years and remain a stranger. But now he was gone. No furniture. No clothes. No dishes in the sink. The walls had been scrubbed with industrial cleaner. Even the carpet felt newer than it should have been. This wasn't fleeing. This was erasing. Forensics combed through every inch. Beneath the kitchen sink, taped to the plumbing, they found a disposable prepaid phone snapped in half. Inside the broken casing, the SIM card was still intact. It would take hours to extract the data. Outside, Sheriff Harrow addressed the press again, But this time his tone had shifted. "We are investigating the possibility that additional individuals were involved in the murder of Officer Jenkins. This remains an active and dangerous situation." Active and dangerous. Two words that rippled across national headlines. Meanwhile, Victor Tony Jones was still out there. And if the body cam footage told the truth, he had been in the line of fire just as much as Jenkins. But why run? That question gnawed at McKenna. If Victor wasn't the shooter, if he knew someone else was watching from the tree line, then why disappear? Why try to pawn the officer's weapon? Unless he wasn't running from the law. Unless he was running from whoever had pulled that first trigger. The SIM card data cracked open the next layer. The prepaid phone had received 3 calls the night of the shooting. All from the same number. An unregistered VoIP account traced back to the same Tallahassee LLC that had deposited $5,500 into Victor's bank account. The shell company had a name, Gulf Atlantic Consulting. It shared a mailing address with a law firm specializing in land acquisitions. That detail seemed harmless, until McKenna looked at a zoning map. The trailer park where Jenkins was killed sat directly in the middle of a 40-acre parcel recently purchased by a development group planning to build a private industrial facility. Most residents had already accepted buyouts. 2 had refused. Victor Tony Jones and Raymond Pike. The pieces began aligning in a way no one wanted to say out loud. Pressure, money, refusal, and now a dead police officer. But the timeline still didn't fit. Why would a land development dispute end with a sniper-style shot in the woods? Unless the goal had never been Victor. Unless the goal was chaos. By the 5th day of the manhunt, fatigue was setting in across law enforcement. Helicopters had swept miles of forest. K-9 units tracked dead-end trails. Tips flooded in, most useless, some malicious. Then a hiker found something that reset everything. 20 miles north, near the Apalachicola River, authorities discovered a shallow campsite hidden beneath heavy canopy. A fire pit. Food wrappers. A stolen first aid kit. And blood. Not pooled. Not splattered. But smeared across a tree trunk, as if someone had steadied themselves. Forensic analysis confirmed it wasn't Officer Jenkins. It was Victor's. DNA matched from prior arrest records. He was injured. Which meant 2 things. He hadn't escaped cleanly. And he was getting desperate. As night fell, a deputy monitoring rural traffic cameras spotted a familiar face inside a gas station outside Panama City. Victor. Hood up. Baseball cap low. Buying bottled water and gauze. The deputy called it in immediately. Units converged fast, but Victor was already back on the road in a stolen sedan. The pursuit lasted 8 minutes. Rain-slick highways. Flashing lights. Sirens tearing through quiet neighborhoods. Victor drove erratically, one hand gripping the wheel, the other pressed against his side. Bloodless. Fear. He didn't fire at officers. He didn't ram vehicles. He drove like a man who knew he was running out of options. The chase ended when he lost control near a marsh embankment. The sedan spun twice and slammed into a ditch. Deputies approached with weapons drawn. Victor stumbled out, hands raised. "Don't shoot," he shouted hoarsely. "They're still out there." He collapsed face first into the mud. At the hospital, under heavy guard, Victor drifted in and out of consciousness. The bullet wound grazed his ribcage, non-fatal but serious. He had been hit the same night Jenkins was killed, which confirmed what the body cam already suggested. He hadn't fired the first shot. When he was stable enough to speak, Detective McKenna sat across from him in a sterile interview room. He looked thinner, hollowed, less like a monster and more like a man unraveling. "You took the officer's gun," she said calmly. Victor swallowed. "I thought they'd come back for it." "Who?" He hesitated. His eyes shifted toward the mirrored glass. "You think I'm crazy? Convince me you're not." Victor leaned forward despite the pain. "They paid me to sign. $5,000 to move." I said no. Then Pike comes over one night and says it's not about money anymore. Says there are people who don't like delays. What people? He wouldn't say. Just kept saying the deal was bigger than trailers. McKenna remained still. "The night Jenkins came," Victor continued, voice shaking, Pike told me someone would stop by. Said I needed to cooperate. I didn't know what he meant. And the shooter? Victor's jaw tightened. In the trees. I saw the flash. I hit the ground. Jenkins got hit first. I swear to you, I didn't shoot him. Then how did he end up executed at close range? Victor's silence filled the room. Finally, he whispered, because he wasn't supposed to survive. The weight of that statement pressed hard. Who pulled the trigger after? McKenna asked. Victor closed his eyes. Pike walked up. The air felt thinner. You saw him? I saw his boots. Same ones he always wore. Steel toe. He stood over Jenkins. Said something like, loose ends. Then, Victor's voice broke. McKenna didn't push. After a long pause, he added, he looked at me. Said I was next if I talked. The problem was, there was still no physical evidence placing Raymond Pike at the scene. No fingerprints. No DNA. Nothing tying him directly to the gunshot residue beyond Victor's word. And Victor Tony Jones was still, in the eyes of the public, the man who pawned a dead officer's weapon. But then forensics finished enhancing the reflection in the trailer window from the body cam footage. They zoomed, adjusted contrast, stabilized the frame. The metallic object in the silhouette's hand wasn't a gun. It was a radio, and clipped to the man's belt was something unmistakable. A badge. Not a local sheriff's badge. Not highway patrol. Different shape. Different seal. The image was grainy, but clear enough to recognize federal insignia. Someone in law enforcement, or someone dressed like it, had been standing behind Victor before the first shot was fired. Which meant the sniper in the tree line might not have been the only one orchestrating events. When McKenna brought that still image to Sheriff Harrow, the color drained from his face. Because earlier that week, a representative from Gulf Atlantic Consulting had attended a closed-door county zoning meeting. And he hadn't come alone. He'd arrived with a private security consultant, a former federal agent, named Raymond Pike. And when investigators pulled Pike's full background, not the sanitized version on his lease application, they found something buried deep in federal personnel records. He hadn't left his agency voluntarily. He'd been dismissed. Internal misconduct. Use of excessive force. Sealed file. The hunt had never been about a drifter killing a cop. It was about something far more controlled. Far more deliberate. And now, with Victor in custody and Pike vanished without a trace, the question shifted again. Was Officer Jenkins responding to a domestic dispute? Or was he walking into a staged encounter designed to send a message? Because if a former federal agent tied to a shadow LLC was coordinating land acquisitions through intimidation, then Jenkins' death might not have been collateral damage. It might have been a warning. And if that was true, Victor Tony Jones wasn't just a fugitive. He was a liability someone very powerful wanted silenced. And in a state where the death penalty moves swiftly for those convicted of killing law enforcement, the clock was already ticking. By the time the trial began, the story had already hardened in the public mind. A dead police officer. A fugitive with a violent past. A stolen service weapon. A pawn shop transaction caught on camera. Victor Tony Jones sat at the defense table in a neatly pressed shirt, thinner than he had been the night deputies pulled him from the marsh. The bruises had faded. The wound had healed. But the look in his eyes hadn't changed. He didn't look like a mastermind. He looked like a man who understood he was losing. The prosecution moved first and moved hard. They didn't need to prove a conspiracy. They didn't need to unravel Gulf Atlantic Consulting. They didn't need to explain shell companies or zoning disputes. They needed one thing: to convince 12 jurors that Victor Tony Jones intentionally killed Officer Michael Jenkins. They built their case with precision. Victor was at the scene. Victor fled. Victor pawned the officer's weapon. Victor withdrew thousands in cash days before the shooting. Victor had a criminal record involving violence. And most powerful of all, the final, fatal shot was fired at close range. Gunshot residue tests confirmed that Jenkins was shot point-blank in the head after the initial chaos. The defense tried to pivot. They played the body cam footage repeatedly, freezing the moment of the first muzzle flash from the tree line. They highlighted Victor diving to the ground. They emphasized his own gunshot wound. They introduced Raymond Pike as a shadow figure, former federal agent, private security consultant, suddenly vanished. They presented financial records showing payments from Gulf Atlantic Consulting to both Victor and Pike. They argued that Victor panicked, that he grabbed Jenkins' weapon in fear, that he ran because he believed powerful people would kill him next. But juries don't deliberate on shadows. They deliberate on what's provable. And Raymond Pike was nowhere to be found. No arrest. No body. No forensic link placing him at the scene beyond Victor's testimony. The enhanced reflection image? Too grainy. Too ambiguous. The defense expert said it suggested a badge. The prosecution expert said it could have been a belt buckle. Reasonable doubt lives in clarity. And clarity was missing. Then the prosecution introduced a final piece of evidence that landed like a hammer. Ballistics. The fatal bullet recovered from Jenkins' skull matched the officer's own service weapon, the same one Victor tried to sell. The first shot from the woods? Fired from a high-caliber rifle never recovered. But the execution shot, the one that ended Officer Jenkins' life, came from his own gun. The courtroom went silent. If Pike shot first, chaos erupted, and Victor grabbed the weapon. Then someone used that weapon at close range. And only 2 men were present in that final moment. One was dead. The other was on trial. When Victor took the stand, against his attorney's advice, the tension was suffocating. "I didn't kill him," he said, voice steady but thin. "I grabbed the gun because I thought I was next. I ran because I didn't think anyone would believe me." "Why pawn it?" the prosecutor asked. Victor hesitated. "I needed money." "For what?" Silence stretched. "Because I knew they'd come looking." "Who is they, Mr. Jones?" Victor's jaw tightened. "You already know." But knowing isn't the same as proving. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty of first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer. The penalty phase moved quickly. Florida law is clear. The murder of a police officer in the line of duty is among the most aggravated crimes. The prosecution argued brutality, calculated action, and lack of remorse. The defense argued fear, manipulation, and a missing co-conspirator who would never testify. The jury recommended death. The judge made it official. Victor Tony Jones was sentenced to execution by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Years passed. Appeals were filed. Appeals were denied. Investigative journalists dug into Gulf Atlantic Consulting. The LC dissolved quietly 2 years after the trial. The land parcel where the trailer park once stood was eventually cleared. Construction never began. Raymond Pike was never located. Some believed he fled overseas. Others believed he never existed the way records claimed. Conspiracy theories bloomed in online forums, but none entered a courtroom with evidence strong enough to matter. For the legal system, the case was closed. On the night of his execution, Victor Tony Jones was moved from his death row cell into the final holding area. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above him. He had spent nearly a decade waiting. Time changes a man. The anger that once lived in his posture had drained away. He spoke less. Read more. Wrote letters no one publicly saw. When asked to choose his final meal, he didn't ask for extravagance. Fried chicken. Mashed potatoes with gravy. Cornbread. Sweetie. Simple. Southern. Familiar. He ate slowly. Witnesses later said he seemed calm, not detached, not hysterical. Just quiet. In the execution chamber, the air felt heavy. Behind reinforced glass sat Officer Jenkins' widow, Emily, along with 2 now teenage children who barely remembered their father's voice. Prosecutors attended. Reporters watched with notebooks ready. Victor was strapped to the gurney. The 4 lines were placed. The warden stepped forward. "Victor Tony Jones, do you have any final words?" He turned his head slightly toward the glass. For a moment, it looked as though he might say nothing. Then he spoke. "I didn't pull the first trigger. And I wasn't alone." The pause. They know who they are. No shouting. No dramatic declaration. Just that. Hit subscribe, leave your thoughts below, and stay with me, because this story doesn't just haunt Florida. It lingers. The rain was still falling when deputies found the car.